This person never asked for help, never cried in front of anyone, never needed to say, "Help me." Everything was resolved in silence and with strength. This person learned early that depending disappoints, that trust weakens, that showing feelings opens the door to pain. So they decided not to need, not anyone, not anything. This person protected themselves with autonomy, with rehearsed phrases, with the pride of someone who endures everything alone. But deep down, this person carried a weariness they couldn't name. You didn't want to save, you didn't want to fix, nor prove anything. You just stayed, and you stayed in a way that no one ever did, without invading, without imposing, without asking for more than this person could give. And then something began to change, because this person realized that you didn't want to be necessary, you just wanted to be real. This person tried to maintain control, tried to keep a distance, tried to maintain the facade, but you didn't react like others. You didn't run away, you didn't demand, you didn't disappear, you simply noticed. Noticed when anger was fear, when silence was protection, when pride was hidden longing, and it was there that everything flipped. When this person understood that depending on you didn't mean giving up oneself, it was allowing oneself to rest, it was letting the walls fall, without collapsing alongside them. This person realized that the so-called independence was always a defense, not a choice. And that with you, there was space for something new, something that doesn't suffocate, doesn't demand, doesn't invade, something that simply exists and supports. This person learned, with you, that true freedom is not needing anyone. It's being able to need me and being met with respect. This person remains strong, but now they don't need to pretend they're made of iron. This person still knows how to walk alone, but now knows they can walk alongside someone without losing their step, without losing themselves, without losing anything. They only gained. If this resonated with you, comment, "I needed to read this." Or tell me, have you ever noticed when someone held on even when you tried to push them away? You came into my life unexpectedly, and you didn't even need to say much. It wasn't what you said, it was what you held in silence. It was what you understood even before it was spoken. This person carried the weight of the world, not out of heroism, but out of distrust. They didn't know how to rest, they didn't know how to trust, they didn't know how to need. Because at some point in their life, someone taught them, either directly or cruelly subtly, that depending on someone is dangerous, that relying on others means putting your heart in the hands of someone who doesn't know how to hold it. And that feeling too much is an invitation to disappointment. This person learned early on to close themselves off, to protect themselves, to expect nothing from anyone. And they called it strength, they called it independence, they called it maturity. But you saw beyond that. You noticed the effort behind every short response. You saw the control hidden behind every restrained smile. You recognized the fear behind every solitary decision. You didn't try to dismantle anything. You didn't want to heal any wounds, nor did you force any openings. You stayed, present, perceptive, constant, and you lingered in the details, in the way you listened, in the manner you didn't rush them, in the calmness of someone who knows that presence is worth more than promises. This person was puzzled, suspicious. Maybe they even tried to test you, to be sure you would leave like everyone else, but you didn't leave. And in the silence, a new language began to emerge, without you needing to say anything. This person started to realize that you weren't just another intruder. You weren't a risk. You weren't someone who would drain their already fragile peace. You were a refuge. This person never spelled it out in so many words, but something inside them started to relax, to lower its defenses, to allow for small vulnerabilities. First in a lingering look, then in an unassuming confession, then in a stay that carried everything they had never been able to say. This person, who took such pride in being self-sufficient, started to realize that perhaps the true strength lay in connection, in trust, in the possibility of depending without losing oneself. You didn't want to control, nor to replace, nor to be everything. You just wanted to be there, and that is exactly what healed. This person began to notice how much they missed something they couldn't even name, and that for the first time they were truly living, without fear, without haste, without guilt. The emotional dependency that once felt like a wound transformed into a bond, and more, into healing, because now, this person was no longer an island. They were a being in connection. You held their hand without squeezing, gave them space without withdrawing, accompanied them without carrying, and this taught them something that no past experience could show, that to love is not to invade, it is to perceive, it is to respect, it is to be a presence that welcomes, not a presence that demands. This person, who once had a horror of the word need, could now take a deep breath and say, I need, but not out of weakness. Out of choice, you became a safe space, a silent mirror, fertile ground, and not because you did something extraordinary, but because you were human, sincere, available. This person still remains independent, but now it's an independence that doesn't isolate. It's an independence that chooses to surrender with awareness, without losing their own center, without suffocating the other, without the fear of being abandoned at the slightest sign of affection. You redefined everything, without forcing, without demanding, without even knowing the depth of the impact you made. This person, for the first time, was able to lay their head on someone's chest, without the weight of vigilance, without the fear of being weak, without the worry of needing too much. And in that moment, this person's body spoke what their mind still couldn't translate. I can depend, I can trust, I can be whole, and still accept that someone can complete me in parts. Do you perceive the depth of this? Do you realize how transformative this is? Do you notice that there are people who spend their entire lives pretending to be strong when all they desire is a place where they can be weak for a few moments? This person discovered with you that depending on someone isn't about losing yourself. Depending on someone isn't about giving yourself up. Depending is allowing the other to be part of what was once solitude. You changed the concept. You changed the rhythm. You changed the direction. And this person saw you, recognized you, acknowledged you, in simple gestures, in patient listening, in a presence that doesn't require explanation. And maybe they will never say this out loud, but they hold within them a before and after, because the presence you were continues to resonate, even when you're not together, even when pride tries to take over, even when fear tries to creep back in. This person knows, they felt it, and they can no longer pretend they don't need it, not because something is missing, but because they finally understood what it means to love in a state of reciprocity. If you have ever felt this way with someone, comment, I needed to hear this, or ask yourself, why do you still believe that depending on others is a sign of weakness? This person was freed from a silent prison, the fear of needing, and everything began at the exact moment you decided to stay, even without guarantees, even without promises, even without any certainty. Only with the presence of someone who realizes that true love doesn't shout, it doesn't invade, it doesn't demand, it simply is. And that is what both frightens and heals at the same time. This person wasn't used to permanence. They were used to people who come quickly and leave without explanation, to people who talk about love but disappear at the first silence, to people who label any deeper attempt at affection as demanding. And then you stayed. You stayed when her gaze wandered. You stayed when she didn't know what to say. You stayed when her heart was still too closed to understand what it meant to be loved without being expected to give back. You stayed when there was no clear reciprocation, nor beautiful declarations. You stayed without losing yourself, without fading away, without making it a personal mission. And that person realized, even when they tried to seem indifferent, even when they responded coldly, even when they pretended not to care, they realized, with their body, with their energy, with the silence between one phrase and another. That person realized that you didn't see them as broken, not as a project for salvation. You weren't there to save, you were there to walk alongside. And the realization of this changed everything. That person didn't know what safe love was. They might still not know completely, but now they recognize the feeling. It's a love that doesn't pressure, doesn't threaten, doesn't suffocate, but also doesn't pull away, doesn't give up, doesn't vanish. It's a presence that breathes. It's a touch that respects. It's a word that seeks understanding, not persuasion. And then, little by little, that person began to allow the touch, allow the care, allow the pause, allow someone to be there even when they didn't know how to ask, even when everything wasn't okay, even when there were no defenses that made sense anymore. That person stopped running away, not because of you, but because with you, they realized that the fear was greater than it needed to be. and that the time had come to stop fighting against something they had always wanted. Love, simple, silent, concrete, mutual. That person realized that their strength isn't in not feeling, but in allowing themselves to feel, with depth, with wholeness, with presence. Do you see that too? This transformation is subtle, but gigantic. It's not about someone who became dependent. It's about someone who became free to depend. And that changes everything, because now that person doesn't have to prove their worth to anyone anymore. They don't have to do everything alone to feel deserving of affection. They understood that their worth isn't about how much they can endure in silence, but about how much courage they have to live alongside others. You weren't a miracle. You were the mirror, you were the permission, you were the space. This person is still independent, but they are no longer proud. They no longer need to wave flags of strength all the time. They no longer need to pound their chest saying, "I don't need anyone," because now they know not needing is not power. It's a need disguised as autonomy. Now, they choose to share. They choose to open up, they choose to surrender, they choose to need with dignity, with awareness, with emotional maturity, because they realize that depending on someone is not asking for help. It's saying, "I trust you." And when someone says that, with their body, with their eyes, with their soul, everything changes. The internal shackles break. The old pains dissolve. The world for the first time seems livable for two. This person now recognizes the place of emotional safety and knows how rare it is, how precious it is, how fragile it is. And for that reason, they won't treat you like just another person, because deep down, they know you've reached a place where no one else had the courage to stay. And all of this without raising their voice, without promising a future, without making a fuss. You just realized. You noticed the fears disguised as pride. You noticed the absences hidden in routines. You noticed the traumas that didn't ask to be healed, but began to mend simply because someone stayed. You stayed. And that is worth more than any speech about love. If this text resonates with any part of you, write in the comments, "I know what that is." Or better yet, tell me, when did you realize that love could also be a place of rest? This question still echoes in those who feel, because there are people who have spent their lives confusing love with tension, with the fear of losing, with the obligation to please, with the constant need to prove their worth. And this person, who once believed that feeling too much was a sign of weakness, is now starting to realize that true love is the kind that allows space to breathe, not the one that constricts, not the one that demands, not the one that monitors. You showed this without saying a word, without pushing, without trying to convince, and that's why this person saw you. Not as a temporary relief, but as something new, like a place, a home, a space where it's possible to sit and say, "I'm tired. Stay here." And you stayed. You stayed even when she tested your limits, even when she didn't believe in you, even when the instinct was to flee, to shut down, to protect. You didn't shout, you didn't chase after her. You didn't beg for space, you just stayed. In the hardest way, in silence, with consistency, with truth. And this person felt that she no longer needed to fight alone, felt that it was no longer dangerous to trust, felt that her heart didn't need to operate as armor anymore. The most beautiful thing of all is that you didn't take the place of anything. You didn't replace the strength she built. You just showed that now she could rest within that strength, and that depending on someone isn't falling apart. It's allowing someone to see what no one else had the patience to see. This person doesn't talk about this with anyone, but she thinks every day about how you managed to make space without needing to invade, about how you stayed, without asking for anything in return, about how you listened without interrupting, without trying to correct, without trying to solve. What you did, this way of existing close, was what broke the pattern. Because what this person lived before wasn't love, it was a war disguised as a relationship, it was emotional survival, it was convenience. You changed everything. And now when she feels scared, she remembers you, not to put you in the role of savior, but because you became a reference, a before and after. This person may still fight sometimes, may still try to push away, may still say, "I'm fine," even when she's not. But now she knows. She knows there's another way, because you showed her. You showed that it's possible to be loved and still be whole. You showed that it's possible to trust and still have autonomy. You showed that it's possible to need without diminishing anyone. Do you realize how significant this is? Do you understand that there are people who go through their entire lives without experiencing this kind of connection? You have become the exception. And it's not because you did everything right. It's because you were present with your presence. This person learned that from you. That presence transforms more than words. That consistency heals more than promises. That quiet care is worth more than empty declarations. And now she knows, she feels, she perceives. Even if her mouth doesn't say it, her body no longer denies it. She wants, she needs, she chooses. And for someone who spent their life avoiding deep connections, this is more than a step. It's a leap into oneself, a leap away from trauma, a leap toward what only exists when two souls aren't trying to use each other, but to find each other. Have you ever lived this? Have you ever felt someone breaking through your barriers with such presence that you found yourself letting everything fall away? Comment here. I understand what that is. Or tell me, why do you think so many people confuse independence with isolation? If this touched you, comment, subscribe, leave a like and share it with those who need to hear it.